Hi everyone, this is part 1 of the polar bear drawing tutorial. These are the colours I've picked out to use for this one, but I'll be putting a full list in the description below. I'm going to start off with using the dark sepia coloured pencil. I normally always start off using this one. I think it's a really good starting colour. And I'm just going to go ahead and rub out the outline I've drawn. I'm going to start off with the eyes. I always start off with the eyes. So I've just lightly rubbed out the pencil markings so that doesn't show through the final drawing. And then I'm going to use the sepia pencil to just lightly sketch back in the shape of the polar bear's eye. And as you can see, I've got a really sharp pencil to start with, and I'm using a really light pressure. I'm not going in really hard and making a harsh line to begin with. I'm just focusing on getting the shape right before building up those layers that's going to make it look really realistic. And now I'm happy with the shape. I'm just going to start doing a few small lines extending from the circle outwards, just to start giving the idea of the fur direction. And this whole time I'm really looking at the reference photo and making sure I'm not just filling in with my head what I think is there, but I'm really paying attention to what I can actually see in the image. And now I'm just going to go and draw in the darker part of the eye. And now I'm using the blue pencil. I find this one is really good to build up depth instead of just going in with a black pencil. I'll always go in with a dark blue one like this one. And I'm just really focusing on the areas in the image that look the darkest, because most of the eye is dark, but if you look you can see some parts are much darker than others, especially around the outside edge. And again, I'm not using hard pressure, I'm just lightly building up a layer. And now I'm going in with the white Caran pencil, and I'm just putting in the highlight that you can see on the left hand side of the eyeball, just to make sure that doesn't get lost as I'm building up layers. And now I've got the Nougat pencil, and this is quite a good mid-tone for an eye. And I'm just lightly building up a layer in the centre whilst keeping that little patch of white untouched. And I'm also just adding a few more lines in the fur just to blend out those darker lines. And now I've got the Caput Mortuum pencil, which is a nice sort of reddy brown colour. I'm again going to build up a layer in the centre of the eye. And now I'm going in with a blue pencil. I'm going to use that to blend out the highlight of the eye and blend out the edges. And it's just all about building up layers gradually. And now I'm using the Light Aubergine pencil. And I'm just making sure to look at the image and see what colours there really are So there's a bit of purple at the top of the eyeball I'm just putting in now.
And now I'm going to use the Earth Green pencil. And I find this one is so good for realistic portraits such as this. And I'm just lightly going over sort of the bottom section of the eye.
And I think I'm just going to go back in with the Caput Mortuum pencil and just make that colour stand out slightly more. Like that. Now this is a black pencil, but I'm using a pencil extender. I can tell you more about those if you're interested. But basically, when the pencil gets really short, you can use these to just make sure you're getting the most out of the pencils. So now I am going in with a bit harder pressure and really making the darkest parts I can see really black. And that's basically the outline of the eye. But you want to make sure it's not just one black line. You want to make sure it's sort of little lines. They don't all have to be joined up. And I'm just gradually blending that out as well into the fur. And now I'm just darkening the center of the eye and adding a lighter layer towards the bottom part of it. And I'm just using small circular movements with the pencil just to build up layers until I'm happy with how it looks. And I think we are pretty much there with this eye. I'm just going to do one final step with this blue pencil and just gradually blend the slightly lighter parts of the eye. And I think I'm happy with that, so we'll move on to the second eye and we'll do basically the same process again. So I've just got the dark sepia pencil to start with, and I'm really looking at the reference image just to make sure they're in line and where they're supposed to be, because you don't want to get the eyes wrong. I think they're the most important part. Again, I'm just using really light pressure. It's not really about the colour at the moment, it's just about getting the shape right. And now I'm going to go back in with my blue pencil and just focus on the darkest parts that I can see for the eye and create that depth again before I go over with the black pencil. Again, I'm just using really light pressure and focusing on capturing exactly what I see in the reference image and not what my brain thinks is there. And again, there's a little highlight in the corner of the eye, so I've just gone in with the white pencil to make sure that isn't lost in the layering process again. Now I've got the Nougat pencil, and I'm just using that to build the first layer in the centre of the eye. I find it's quite a good base colour for eyes. And now I'm going to use the deep cobalt green, because as I'm looking at the photograph, I'm seeing some green come through on this right eye. So I'm just really lightly going to go in and add a few touches of green. Now I've got my light aubergine pencil again. Just focusing mostly on the bottom of the eye. Now blending it in with the light blue pencil. You want to remember that you don't really want any sharp edges in a drawing like this. So making sure to layer gradually and blend everything is really key to making it look realistic. Now this is the black pencil that I'm going in with, and now I'm going to be adding more pressure just to get the darkest parts really dark. And you want to make sure to keep sharpening your pencils as well. You don't really want to be working with blunt pencils because then you have less control. So I'm pretty happy now with how I've got the darkest parts. I'm going to use the Caput Mortuum pencil to just add a small layer on the eyeball itself. Now I've got the earth green pencil again, and just again adding just tiny details, but they all help it look a little more realistic. And I just couldn't resist going back into the left eye and adding a bit more green. And I've realised the right eye is slightly too far down, so I'm just going in with the white Caran pencil and going over the bottom part with a layer of white I'm using a bit of pressure here just because I want to cover up a darker colour. And just make that eye slightly higher up. And now I'm just going back and looking at any tiny details that I want to add, just because I want to make sure I am completely happy with the eyes before I move on to the rest of the drawing. I'll just do a little close-up so you can see what the two eyes look like for me. But I would say now I'm finished with the eyes and ready to move on to the rest of the piece. So now I'm going to focus on the fur around the eyes, and I'm going to start by using the Cold Grey No. 2 pencil. I'm just going in with my rubber to again rub out the pencil markings I made earlier, just so they don't show through at the end of the drawing. So I'm just rubbing out the section that I'm focusing on to start with, which is around the left eye. And now I'm going to really focus on getting the direction of the fur correct first, and drawing in the shadows and shapes I can see in the photograph. So you can see that the fur pattern goes away from the eye, so under the eye it's going in the direction of left and down, and then above the eye it's going up and again to the left. And I've got a really sharp pencil again, and I'm using a light pressure. I'm not holding it too close to the end, so my marks are quite loose at this stage. And again, it's not about the colour at this first stage, it's just about using a mid-tone to get the details in place before then layering on top of them. And now I've got the Paynes Grey 30% pencil. This is really good for drawing white fur and getting those blue tones in. And I'm just going to focus on the image and look where I can really see the fur is more blue rather than yellow. And that is around the eye is quite blue, so I'm going to start there. And again, every pencil stroke I make for the fur is always going in the right direction of the fur, so that's why drawing the initial fur pattern with the grey pencil is really helpful, because then you don't have to think about it too much whilst layering. And around the eye I started off with quite small, short strokes, and as I'm moving further away I'm using slightly longer strokes just to imitate the way the fur is. And now I've got the Warm Grey No. 2 pencil, and I'm going to focus now on the warmer tones of fur, so where it looks a bit more yellow. And again, I'm just drawing in the direction of the fur, keeping things very light. and just gradually building up the layers. Now I've got the Naples Ochre pencil, and I'm just going to add a few yellow highlights where I can see on the photograph where the fur is the most yellow. So again, it's a really light layer. It's not the final look, it's just a layer that will show through slightly at the end and make it look really realistic. And again, I'm just drawing in the direction of the fur at all times. And now I'm using the earth green, and again, it's the same process of just picking out small points in the fur where you can see. So to the left of the eye, it's looking slightly tinted green, and just underneath it as well. And I'm not colouring in a big block of green, I'm just doing really light marks here and there. And at this stage it will look a bit silly, things aren't blended together yet, but don't worry, you just have to really trust the process. Now I've got the Slate Grey pencil, and I'm going to use this to pick out the darker details I can see in the fur. So a few lines coming from the eye itself, and there's also this part above the eye that you can quite clearly see is quite a lot darker. And again, I'm not doing one solid line, I'm making sure to do lots of little lines just to imitate the fur itself. And I'm just going over the part near the nose, as that's a bit of a shadow as well, so I want to make sure that's really clear. Now I've got the white pencil, and this pencil is so good for blending once you put a few layers down. So I'm just going to start by looking at the parts that are the whitest around the eye and go in with a layer of white. But I'm also using this to blend in the other colours we've put down, so it's a bit less of a harsh line and they're a bit more blended together. And you can use a bit of a harder pressure with this stage because the fur is white, so if you want to build up a thicker layer of white, that works really well. And you also need to have a bit of pressure to really blend the layers you put down before. So you can see with this pencil I am pressing a little harder than I would with a darker pencil. So now I'm feeling quite happy with the amount of white I've built up, and I'm liking how the layers are blending together. I'm just removing the pencil dust with my fingers, and now I'll use the cold grey to just go in and add the finer details that I can see in the fur. So just with really fine lines, not pressing too hard. And now you've built up the white layer, so the paper's quite saturated with pencil. They actually won't go on that darkly, and you do sort of get a feel for this with practice. Now you can't actually see this pencil because I've used it so much it's rubbed off, but this is the French Grey 30%, and I'm just going to quickly show you how a pencil extender works. So you just screw the cap off, pop your pencil inside and then screw it back on. So it basically imitates a full-length pencil, and you're able to sharpen it even if it is really short, so they're really, really helpful. Now I'm happy with the area around the eye, so I'm going to go in and start with the fur a bit further out, including the ear. So I'm just using my rubber again to rub out the pencil marks I made earlier. So I'm going to do just around to the edge of the face on the left, a bit to the top, and then I'm also going to be doing the ear. Okay, so I've got the French Grey in the pencil extender. I'm going to use this to go over the pencil marks I've just rubbed out. It's quite a good mid-tone, judging from what I can see in the photograph, so it's not too dark and it's also not too light, so it's just perfect for mapping out where the shadows will be, and then I can go back in and darken them later. And as you can see for the ear, I'm not just doing sort of a semicircle, I'm still using small marks that go outward, and they're mimicking the way the fur moves, so it isn't just one solid line. So we just got this darker bit that's in the centre of the ear, and then the fur sort of goes just straight up and out. And now I'm just looking at the fur towards the edge of his face. I'm just marking in where the shadows are to start with. And again, I'm doing it in the direction the fur goes at all times. And I'm pressing really lightly and being quite loose with the pencil markings. I'm just going over the edge of the fur now, which isn't actually that dark, but once you do sort of the shadows underneath, it will come out. It's very realistic, so I don't want to spend too much time on that right this second. I'm just rubbing out a bit more. I just feel like doing a bit more of the face feels natural right now, and just finishing off this area. So whilst I'm sort of sketching the bottom left of his face, the bottom line will actually be blended into the shadow you can see on his left paw, and then just above it will be the bright white that you see. So I'm just making sure to get all the direction of the fur sketched in with this colour first, and I'm pretty happy that I've built up the area as much as I want to. Now I'm going to go in with this light blue pencil, and I'm going to focus on the parts of the fur that look more blue to me in the photograph. So you can just follow along with where I'm colouring in the blue if you can't see for yourself. I think it is something that does come with practice, and the more you practice, the more you'll be able to pick out the colours. For the ear, it really seems that the top part of it is more blue and then the bottom part is more yellow. So I'm just lightly building up a blue layer. But the good thing about this is you can always go back in, and if something isn't, blue enough, or you think it should be a warmer tone, and you can always add in another layer of yellow. And that's why it's so important to be really light with your layers and build them up slowly. And I'm just going to use this blue on the very bottom edge of his fur. This will help give the impression of those wispy bits at the bottom. And now I'm going to use the beige red pencil. This is a really nice pink colour to use. And I'm just going in towards the upper edge at the bottom. As you can see, it is quite pink in the photo. So I just want to add that layer in now. Just using some really fine lines. And gradually building that up. So you can see it is quite pink at the moment. And then I'm going to do a few wispy bits at the top of the ear there. And I'm just looking to see where on the photo looks pinkish to me. I'm just adding a little hint of that into the fur. I'm just going to add a little bit more pink down here. And then I'm going to use the olive brown 10% pencil. And now I'm looking for the parts of the fur that look yellow to me. And this is a really good pencil. This is just a bit more of a muted yellow compared to the yellow pencil I used earlier. So it's really good for drawing realistic fur. And you can see with this, once I've put the blue areas in, the yellow areas tend to go between them. They don't really mix. So at this stage it is quite easy to just pick out where I need to put this colour. And you can see underneath the nose, where I am now, is quite yellow. So I am going to be using a few layers to build that up. But I'm not going straight in with the dark yellow colour just yet. And I'm just finishing up with some yellow tones to the ear. And I think I'm quite happy with how the yellow parts are looking for now, so I'm going to move on to using the next colour, if it can get in focus. And this is raw umber, and it's 30%. I know it's hard to see. And again, I just need to put this in a pencil extender because it is really short. So I've sharpened it and it's nice and sharp now. And I'm just going in underneath the nose where it is quite yellowy, it's quite dark. I'm just going to gradually build up the shadow there. And I'm not pressing hard at all, but my pencil is really sharp just to make sure I'm getting the fine detail in. And I'm going over where I did the shadows with the French grey pencil. I'm just making some of those a bit darker. So now you're going to be getting a build up of shadows that are just varying slightly in how dark they are, and this really helps it look very realistic. And I'm going to start building up the shadow from the paw, because instead of going in and trying to draw the edges of the fur, I find it's much easier to draw in the shadows first. This really brings it more to life. And I'm not just creating like a big block of colour here, I'm still using the lines, there's still gaps in the lines, it's not a solid shadow. And some of the lines extend quite far into the white fur and others are just short, and that helps give the variation that you see in the photo. And now I'm going to use the Light Aubergine pencil again and just really gently go in and add some purple tones throughout. So just a bit on the edge of the ear there is looking quite purpley to me, and then a little on the top. Now I have the Warm Grey number 3 pencil, and this is quite a good mid-tone that I'm going to use to blend those shadows in a bit more. So I'm just starting with the ear, getting those shadows in there. And I am using a bit more pressure now, there's a few more layers on the paper. And I do want to build up a slightly darker colour here, it does look a bit darker. Okay, so now I'm happy with the ear for this colour. I'm just moving on to the fur, and I'm going back in to where I originally drew the shadows, and I'm extending them a little more. And just making sure that they are standing out. Now I've got the Cold Grey number 3 pencil, and similarly to what I've just done with the Warm Grey, I'm going back in, using this to blend out, using this to build up the shadows a bit more, but this time I'm focusing on the areas that are more blue. And as always, I'm always drawing in the direction of the fur. And towards the bottom and the outside edge, the fur is quite long, so I'm using really long pencil marks. But as I get closer towards the eye, I use shorter ones. So I think I'm just about there with the cold grey pencil. I'm pretty happy with the amount of colour I've built up for now. So I'm going to go in with the white pencil and I'm going to start blending this out. And don't worry if at the moment it's really not looking, how you want. After you've blended with a white pencil, I always find it looks so much better. You just really have to trust the process and focus on building up the right layers and adding the right tones of colour throughout, and then it really comes together at the end. So I'm just starting with the whiter parts, and when you are doing the white parts, you want to make sure you're sort of cleaning off the pencil as you go, otherwise it can end up just looking a bit murky and you don't really want that. So just be mindful of that when you are blending. And I am using quite a hard pressure here because you are trying to layer a lighter colour over darker colours. This part does take a bit of time, but it is really worth it in the end. So you just want to keep going until you've got a nice layer of white pencil and everything is blended and there aren't too many marks that are really crisp. So I think I'm pretty much happy with how it's looking now. And I'm going to go back in, now I've blended everything, with the warm grey number 3 pencil. I'm just going to go back in and put some fine lines in just to make sure it's looking really realistic with the fur. And I'm just focusing mostly on where the darker parts of the fur are. Now there is this part at the bottom that does have some quite dark shadows, so I'm just drawing them out with the warm grey pencil. I'm just trying to get them in the right place. And then I'll gradually build them to be slightly darker than this, I think. I'm just really paying attention now to where the darker parts of the fur are, and just using this pencil to really darken them up a bit more. It's just a bit darker towards this edge here, so I'm going to go in with another layer. And also focusing on creating those little wispy bits towards the edge as well. I'm just darkening up some parts of the ear now, because I can see in the photo it's a bit darker, so I'm just adding another layer, especially towards the tip of the ear, and making sure that the pencil marks just go over the edge slightly so it looks nice and wispy. And now I'm going to get the Slate Grey pencil. I'm going to use this on the inner part of the ear that you can see is really quite dark grey. I'm just going to gently build up a dark layer, and so I can gradually make it darker until I'm happy with it. And then there's just a few spots in the ear that are also a bit of a darker grey, so I'll just add that in as well. And now I'll use the grey again, and I'll just darken up these shadows right at the bottom. And you can see I'm not going over the whole of the shadow, instead I'm going to the innermost part of it and just darkening up one area, and this really makes the drawing look more realistic, because shadows wouldn't just be one colour, they'd be a variation of colours, and this is a really great way of making sure you've got that in a drawing. And I think I'm almost there with adding these dark, tiny shadows throughout. I'm just going to use my earth green pencil again, because I feel like parts of the ear are just a bit more green. So I'm just gently going over this area, really lightly, and just adding more of a tone of green throughout. And I'll just add a bit more throughout the fur as well. And I'll also get the olive brown pencil again and just use this to add a bit more warmth to some areas of the fur. So I'm just starting with the ear here, and it's a good way to blend out the green that we've just put down. And again, I'm just using this to go over some parts of the fur and add back in a bit of colour that may have got blended out with the white. So it is a bit of a process of putting colour down, blending it out, and then adding a bit more in. But it does create a really realistic drawing in the end, so it's really worth doing. And just to finish off the end of part 1 of this tutorial, I'm just going to go in with the sky blue pencil. This is quite a nice, vibrant light blue. And I'm just going to lightly add in a few blue touches to the cooler parts of the fur. And this is really helpful to make it look sort of a bright white colour. And just add a bit more depth to the whiter areas. And you can see that I am drawing with quite a lot of pressure now, and that is just due to there being quite a few layers of pencil on the page now. So to really get the colour to go down, you do have to gradually add a bit more pressure. And you can see now it's all really nicely blended together. And that is actually the end of part 1 of this polar bear drawing tutorial, and the first tutorial I've done. So I really hope you guys liked it and you found it helpful. I'm going to be trying to do one of these tutorials every week, so next week will be part 2 of this polar bear tutorial. So make sure that you've liked and subscribed so you can keep drawing along with me. I'd love to see your progress, so if you have Instagram and want to tag me in your work, I'll leave my handle below. And if you have any questions, just pop a comment below and I'll try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in part 2.